Hello and welcome everyone to day 3 of the Philippine Harm Reduction Summit 2021. It's Rod here and we're back again for another day of learning, collaborating, and advocating. To start our day off, we will be discussing a topic that has already in the past made waves here in the Philippines, showing us that caring for individuals is all about practicality, collaboration, and love. To borrow a piece from the book of RuPaul, when I say everybody say love, can we fill the chat box up with love? Can we try it? Everybody say love. There we go. Thank you, everyone. I can feel the love all the way here and from different parts of the world. I hope we can continue this love fest throughout the session and the rest of the summit by reminding ourselves of the principles, which you will find pinned at the chat box and our global feed. So without further ado, it is my privilege to introduce our resource person for this session, whom I have had the lucky pleasure to have met around 3 years ago. Dr. Andrew Tatarsky is a pioneer who developed IHRP, or Integrative Harm Reduction Psychotherapy, an approach to treat individuals with compassion and pragmatism. Dr. Andrew is the founder and director of the Center for Optimal Living in New York City. He is also the past president of the Division on Addiction of the New York State Psychological Association and member of the Medical and Clinical Advisory Boards of the New York State Office of Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Services. Dr. Andrew has had the chance to visit the Philippines twice, in 2015 and in 2018, to do a talk and workshop on journeying with people using the IHRP approach. Ladies and gentlemen, and people of diverse Soji SC who are present today, let us give some love to Dr. Andrew Tatarsky.
My name is Andrew Tatarsky, and I'm coming to you from the Center for Optimal Living in New York City. First of all, I'd like to say that it's a tremendous honor for me to be participating in this summit and connecting with my Philippine friends once again. And I'd like to thank Inez and her team at NoBox for making this possible. I'm an addiction psychologist, and I've been working on the front lines in the addiction field for my entire career. And I've been wrestling with the question of why have we been doing such a terrible job of helping people that struggle with drugs. In this brief presentation, I'm going to share really my ideas about how I understand that failure and some ideas that can really inform a much more effective way of helping people across the entire spectrum. This is a brief snapshot or taste of a body of work that I've given in many places and in intensive trainings. I hope that it whets your appetite for more. So we're going to be talking about treating the entire spectrum of problematic substance use with integrative harm reduction psychotherapy, which is an approach to treatment that I've developed that I think can really inform and enhance treatment across the entire continuum of care. I think we need to begin by considering that problematic and addictive substance use is one of our greatest humanitarian crises around the globe. And the problem is, as I've come to understand it, is that the way that we think about problematic substance use is wrong, largely wrong, and has been responsible for our failure to effectively treat it. We've had a lot of traditional thinking about addiction, problematic substance use, that I think has been really problematic. Thankfully, I believe that we are in a global paradigm shift that's happening in the addictions field right now. And we're moving away from an old, more limited biological view of addiction as a disease toward what I call a psychobiosocial framework. That is, a framework that considers that biology, psychology, and social context interact in ways that are really unique for each person, giving rise to problematic substance use. And that shift in thinking, that shift in our models, really supports a shift from a traditional abstinence-only approach to treatment toward an integrative harm reduction approach toward helping people across the entire continuum of care. So let's think about the realities that challenge us. Most problematic drug users are not willing to stop, at least at the point that they become concerned about their use. And many drug users have different goals for different substances. Some people may really be committed to stopping what they consider to be a problematic drug, but not drugs that they don't consider to be problematic. And the reality is that with most addictive behaviors, such as sex, eating, internet, shopping, abstinence is simply not an option. So these are the realities that we, as a group of people that are concerned about helping people that struggle with drugs, need to have a way of meeting people effectively where they are around these particular challenges. Now, I think one of a very useful frameworks for understanding or helping us to begin to understand why most problematic users are not ready to stop is something that Prochaska, Norcross, and DiClemente came up with as what they call a trans-theoretical stages of change model. And they wrote about this in their book, Changing for Good. What they did was they interviewed a large number of people that were engaged in high-risk behavior who were successful self-changers. And they wanted to figure out what was it that they went through, what was the process that they went through that brought them to successful self-change. And they came up with this model that actually most of these folks had gone through a series of stages before they became ready to take action around positive change. And as you see in this triangle, on the bottom is the pre-contemplation phase, in which people don't identify that they have a problem and therefore don't think that they need to make a change. That's where probably most substance users are, because in fact, most substance users don't have problems. And many of them who do have problems haven't yet made the connection. Now, once people begin to make the connection that their substance use is problematic and they're in conflict and struggle with it, they move into what's called the contemplation phase, in which people have a lot to think about in terms of what is the nature of the problem, what changes do I need to make, do I need to stop, can I cut back, what other things in my life do I need to change? And as people become clear about the need to make a change, they now move into what's called preparation, which is, now how am I going to go about making this change? Can I do it on my own? Do I need treatment? Can I tell my family? Can I get them involved? What other changes in my life? If I'm going to give up the substance or cut back, I need to address all sorts of issues that may be contributing to my substance use. Now, once all of that has been figured out and people are really prepared to change, they have a plan, they're motivated, and they can move into action. But as you can see in this triangle, at least half, if not the majority of people, are below that action stage of change. And that's where I think most problematic substance users are. And what's also interesting about the work that these folks did is that they looked at people who engaged in 15 different high-risk behaviors. And they found that at any point in time, over 80% of people in each of these groups were not ready to take action around change. So what that really helps us to do is to contextualize that problematic substance users who are not ready to change are in general not much different from other people who engage in high-risk behavior. And in fact, we all engage in high-risk behavior. So I think that this model helps us normalize the struggles that problematic substance users have. So if we're not going to think about addiction as disease, what would be an alternative? And I think we have a new addiction model that many people are coming at from different directions, in which I think the kernel of it is that we can consider addiction, or what we call addiction, as a meaningful response to suffering, to the conditions of our lives and their negative impact on us emotionally and physically. From this point of view, we could consider that the addictive process expresses multiple meanings. It has lots of meaning on multiple levels for people. And these meanings are on a spectrum of awareness. meaning that some people really know why they're using, they know what is motivating them, what the issues are, and other people don't. And particularly where there's trauma, a lot of the motivation, the reasons that people are turning to substances are out of awareness. And to the extent that that is the case, we might think about problematic substance use as being like a language that's expressing something that's out of people's awareness. And therefore, we can consider that people move into action rather than being able to identify the reason, the meaning, the motive, the feelings, put them into words and express them directly in words rather than action. So people use drugs and turn to drugs in problematic ways for all sorts of reasons. Just a small smattering of them are here. We can see that the self-medication hypothesis, that is turning to substances to medicate suffering, is something that most people can really understand. We might also consider that people turn to drugs to care for themselves when they don't have other options, other avenues to care for themselves, or fun, pleasure, and particularly in deprived circumstances. And I think that that's something that all of us have been experiencing to some extent or other during the pandemic, when many of our normal outlets for self-care and pleasure and fun have been restricted. And in fact, we've seen many more people turning to alcohol and other drugs as a consequence. Trauma is very frequently at the heart of why people turn to drugs to medicate symptoms of trauma. And one of those symptoms is emotion dysregulation. So feeling flooded by uncomfortable feelings, people often turn to a substance to manage those uncomfortable feelings. People may turn to a drug to shore up a sense of identity if people's sense of identity is really negative or faulty. Even though being a drug user, a person who uses drugs, may be a negative identity to some extent, it can connect you with a whole network of other people who use drugs, which can feel, supportive in a way, like you're not alone. And therefore, substances can also help people bond, connect, feel part of a group. Problematic use might also be, not always, but a form of self-destructiveness, particularly when people feel tremendous despair, pain, suffering. They may want to hurt themselves as a form of self-punishment. And then we might consider body needs. Physical pain often causes people to turn to substances to numb the pain. Fatigue, being overworked, being exhausted from the pandemic and being on screens, enhancing performance or aging. So let's consider that all of these and many, many more reasons may be operating as motivations to use. Now, once people turn to a substance in a way that helps, like a coping mechanism, over time, that connection, that behavior may start to become deeply ingrained as a habit. So habits are really hard to change. Stimulus response reinforcement is a very simple way to think about what creates habits. I feel anxious, I have a drink, I feel better. Do that 100 times or 1,000 times. And when I feel anxious, I may feel a strong urge for a drink. Or even when I'm anticipating going into an anxiety-provoking situation, I may feel like I want to have a drink. So that substances then can become chained to all of these motivations and become what are called overlearned habits, deeply ingrained habits. But one interesting piece about this is that what gets conditioned is not just the behavior, but the urge to engage in the behavior. So that urge is what gets strongly conditioned. You hear people who struggle with addictions talk about a strong craving, a strong urge, an irresistible urge. Well, to the extent that we can actually help people develop skills for stopping the action around that urge, breathing, sitting still with the urge, it becomes possible to think about new solutions to that motivation. And finally, there's a different way to think about the brain involvement than disease. And Mark Lewis, a neuroscientist, has been a major contributor here in his book, The Biology of Desire, Why Addiction is Not a Disease. He teaches us that motivated repetition of the same thoughts or behaviors are what lead to habit formation. Repetition, as he says, changes the brain's wiring so that neural networks get set up that carry habit behavior. And therefore, there's a restructuring of the brain, which is why addictive habits can be so difficult to change. However, I think the good news is that through neural plasticity, that is the brain's ability to continue to change and evolve and grow and develop new learning, we can learn new ways of coping, new ways of responding to those initial triggers and motivations for using. And finally, I think we need to consider the social context, and particularly the context of criminalization. That is, so if people who use drugs are turning to them for positive reasons, and yet they are illegal, people now have to worry about becoming incarcerated, getting arrested, and that can lead to shame, guilt, anxiety, lying, hiding, not wanting to seek out help when people are in trouble. And I think all of that can contribute to the initial suffering and contribute to escalations in substance use with greater negative consequences. Portugal and several other places have decriminalized drugs for many years now. And what they've found is that actually problematic use and overdose have gone down, not up. And people being in treatment, seeking out treatment voluntarily has increased. So decriminalization seems like a very good thing for many reasons. Bruce Alexander is a psychologist from Canada who gave us a whole theory to support what I'm talking about, the social dislocation theory. And that is that he found in his research that when animals and people are dislocated from sources of positive support, they tend to feel more anxious, more depressed, have more suicide, more hopelessness, etc. And all of that then in turn contributes to increased vulnerability to use substances in problematic ways, as the addiction provides the relief and a compensation for lonely, disconnected lives. This is a complicated model, but just to simplify it, on the upper left circle, we might consider all of those factors in that circle as vulnerabilities, not causes, but vulnerabilities for why people may turn to a substance and find it useful. So the substance in some way is helpful, is reinforcing, is pleasurable in relation to those vulnerabilities, which would help us understand why people would then begin to use in an ongoing and regular basis. Now, chronic, substance use over time may contribute to increased problems at a neurochemical level in the brain, in terms of impact on health, emotional, health and physical health. Because of that criminalization, people may be isolating, and all of that can contribute to greater suffering and greater substance use. So now you've got a process in motion, but it helps us begin to understand why people would continue to use in the face of increasing negative consequences. Now the substance is helping in some way, while it may be increasingly hurting people. And that's the dilemma that I think that many problematic substance users are caught in. And that's where we need to meet them, around their active use that's becoming increasingly problematic, which is the dilemma that folks need help resolving in some more effective way. Now, I think that also is the basic theoretical rationale for why harm reduction is so essential. This is the National Harm Reduction Coalition's definition, that it's a set of practical strategies and ideas aimed at reducing negative consequences associated with drug use. It's also a movement for social justice because problematic drug users have been stigmatized, incarcerated, punished. And I think that all of that has been one of the greatest harms associated with problematic drug use or drug use in general. But let's consider those ideas associated with harm reduction. And we can consider that harm reduction principles or ideas are like a frame that can frame how we can set up helping relationships. Alan Marlatt called it compassionate pragmatism. We did a whole series of days, training and workshops on that in the Philippines several years ago. Just think compassion drives our wish to reduce suffering. The pragmatic part is that we need to be constantly evaluating what we're doing in terms of how effective it is. And we need to be willing to change our theories, our strategies, our practices really at every level if they're not working. The key shift for me is the idea of any positive change. That is, rather than requiring abstinence, the harm reduction shift says that any reduction in drug-related harm, any step in a positive direction is a good thing that needs to be supported and applauded without requiring abstinence as a commitment or even imposing any of our values or our agendas, except to be helpful. Then that enables us to really meet people where they are on their terms. And that is really going to strengthen the possibility of an alliance, working together with people. So then we can meet people around all positive change goals, safer use, reduced use, moderation, and abstinence, and around all stages of change. We can engage people in all of those stages of change in that triangle that I talked about. What this is going to do is it's going to lower the threshold for entering a helping relationship. That is, we can offer people help on whatever positive change goal they are ready to begin working on, whether it's around substance use or other issues in their lives. So now we can tailor our interventions, our strategies to the very unique people in unique circumstances that we're trying to be helpful to. And I think being non-judgmental and empathic are really critical to creating this frame that starts where people are. And incremental change is another central part of this. Rather than requiring quantum change, move from where you are to stopping, we can think about the harm reduction process as a step-by-step process in the positive direction toward reduced harm and improved quality of life. And key principles are radical acceptance. We accept people where they are on their terms. We want to work to empower people to get in the driver's seat of their process of change. And we work collaboratively as a team, really supporting that individual and discovering what's true for them and what goals and approach to positive change is going to best suit them. Now, finally, I'll say a few words about my way of applying these harm reduction principles to psychotherapy and substance use treatment. And this is really the basis of a very intensive training that I've developed that some of you might be interested in joining. We're having our next training in May, and it's online. So these are 7 therapeutic tasks that are really a way that I've thought about mapping the therapeutic process. And they kind of build on one another. So the first one on the top, in the middle, we call managing the therapeutic alliance. That we need to have a therapeutic alliance with folks if we're going to be able to work together in any way. Everything else depends on an alliance. And so this idea of meeting people where they are on their terms enables us to come up with shared goals and a shared strategy for making positive change. That's the foundation. Then around that alliance, a relationship builds. And our relationship, our helping relationship itself can become an agent of healing and growth. And there are many ways in which relationships do that. Think about your experience with a teacher that you really liked versus a teacher that you hated. you probably did a lot better in the classes with the teacher that you liked. The relationship is really conducive to learning and growth. Now, the third task we think about is enhancing self-management skills, because to the extent that people have difficulty with managing their emotions, managing their relationships, and so on, self-management, self-regulation deficits, and that may be a reason why people move into impulsive action to use a substance to try to manage and contain distress. It may be essential to help people shore up and develop their capacities to self-regulate, to self-manage, to sit still with distress, as a way of then looking at the problematic behavior and beginning to work with it more effectively. And one of the things that we need to work with people to do is to help them assess, self-assess the nature of their own problem. Why am I using in the way that I am? What are all of the factors, the psychobiosocial factors? What are the meanings and functions that this behavior has for me? And as we can tease apart all of those factors, it becomes possible then to goal set around those factors. The fifth task of embracing ambivalence is really a key. We think back to that framework, the psychobiosocial framework that I showed before. If people are using in a way that's helping and also in a way that's hurting, they're going to be caught in this ambivalent dilemma. And so we want to invite people to bring both sides of that ambivalence into the room, the part that wants to change and the part that is still finding the substance useful, so that we can create a constructive dialogue to come up with new ways to resolve that dilemma. So for example, if I'm using because I'm anxious, and I can get some help in reducing the anxiety or managing the anxiety more effectively in other ways, that's going to support the motivation to cut back or stop the substance. So as we can get clear about the two sides of that ambivalent dilemma, we can then start thinking about harm reduction goal setting, setting positive change goals with the part that wants to use, with alternative solutions, and then setting positive change goals around the problematic or addictive substance use. Once we've got some good goals, now we can set about coming up with a personalized plan for change. So you see, the idea of having a plan and having goals at the beginning of the change process can be a real setup for failure. But if we can have an alliance, we can work in the relationship, we can support firming up self-regulation, we can then begin to assess collaboratively, resolve ambivalence in new ways, and all of that then sets the stage for goal setting, motivation, and positive change plans. So thank you very much. I hope you will join me after this presentation for a live interchange. And bring your questions, and we'll have hopefully a lively discussion.